Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 124, where we're going to talk about disconnection and moving from disconnection to connection, even when you have a busy life. But before we dive in, I'd love to invite you to hit subscribe if you have not yet, and to take one little step further and leave a review if you've been enjoying this podcast. It would mean so much to me. So head over to Apple Podcasts and click the leave a review button. All right, so I was inspired to do this episode for you because I just had an experience of temporary disconnection with my husband that really helped me remember in an experiential way what you might be going through and what it feels like to be in disconnection and maybe even to live in it for a long time. I certainly know what that's like, but it was good to have a reminder. It really helps give me even more empathy for those of you who are going through it. And you know, I really consider this experience to have been a good one because it's going to help me help you even better. But also it's reminded me of why it matters to stay in connection, to keep connection alive, and to work for that connection. Because, you know, it's not just going to happen magically, which I think is a mistake of thinking that so many of us make. And it's not going to happen necessarily if we're not working effectively for it. You know, so many of us are trying to stay connected or trying to create more connection, but we aren't doing it in the ways that actually work. And I certainly know this from deep experience personally. If you've been following my story or if you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, you'll know that in my first marriage, I was desperate for more connection and I was really inept at creating more of it. Like I was really doing a lot of what I call the backfiring tactics, which are exactly what they sound like, right? They're like, we're trying to create more of the good stuff in our relationship, but we're actually doing it in a way that creates more of the hard stuff, more of the distance, more of the disconnection. So because I don't want that for you, I thought I'd share this very personal recent experience with you and then share how I helped my husband and I find our way back to really sweet connection. And actually how ultimately we didn't really lose connection. We actually kind of kept it low grade simmering alive, you know, even if it was beyond a sort of a veil. And I'm going to share how you can also not feel like it is truly lost, even when life gets overwhelmingly busy and full and you are temporarily both so distracted that you aren't in the active dance of deep connection, right? You're not actively feeling like you're engaging in a connected way. Because let's be real, modern life for most of us is super full, especially if you and your partner both have careers, if you have a home to tend to, and especially if you throw into that mix children. And then there's hopefully the things that you are both doing for your own pleasure and hobby and social life. Not to mention a lot of the sort of environmental and social unrest that many of us are affected by. Which brings me to my story. So I live in Vermont, as you may or may not know. And as you may or may not have heard, Vermont last week was hit by a giant storm that flooded most of the state. And I live in one of the towns that was most affected. I mean, it's just a true disaster here. Luckily, my home and my family are all fine. We live up on a hill. We really weren't affected personally. My son's places of work were in just the heart of our town was just under multiple feet of water. And it looks like the apocalypse down there right now. So that was happening all week. There was a lot of commotion, a lot of volunteering to help, just a lot going on with that. I had some medical procedures. My husband had heard some big life-changing news about his work situation. The kids are home from school, especially the little guy, like not really in his normal routine, needing care. We need to get him places for care, or he's around while I've been working. So you kind of get the picture. It's been a little bit chaotic around here, and not just like logistically, but emotionally. And actually, before the flood, there was also, like the week before, there was a lot going on as well. It was just another one of those very full weeks. And so by like mid last week after the flood, I really started noticing that feeling of disconnection creeping in. And here's the thing about disconnection that I really want you to hear. Disconnection, that feeling of being disconnected with your partner, can have this tendency to kind of bring up more resentment and lead to some blame. And vice versa, right? So if you're in some resentment about something, we have this tendency to start blaming, right? And that can lead to more disconnection, right? So it's this vicious cycle that can happen. And as highly sensitive people, I think that this can happen more quickly because we're so sensitive to everything, right? So we're sensitive to whether we're feeling connection with our partner or not, whether we're feeling disconnected or not. So this is part of what I started to notice beginning to happen for me last week. At first it was just like, oh, we're not connecting. And I wasn't really even thinking about it, right? It was like my husband and I were kind of like ships in the night, right? We're just passing and not slowing down, not having moments of connecting. But then I noticed that I started to feel kind of edgy with him. And sometimes for me, when I'm so busy, when my life is really full, I won't notice it emotionally as much. I'll notice it in my behavior. So I'll start being a little more with him. Or just like short, right? Like the way I speak to him shifts. I'm sure some of you can really relate. And so when I noticed that, I slowed down and I took a closer look. And what I saw was that I was starting to feel that resentful, annoyed feeling and this sort of urge to like be blamey towards him. And I think this is kind of where it goes wrong for so many of us, or where this is like a slippery slope here, right? We start to feel some disconnection. And then our partner starts to seem like what I call the bad other. You've heard me talk about this before earlier in the podcast. It's like he becomes this kind of bad other person, and like the annoying things he does start seeming like a bigger deal. Right? We get bothered more easily. We start to notice all the things that are wrong. Like those start to really loom large in our experience. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? And then from there, it's so easy to just start blaming and acting not so kind, right? Of course, this just leads to more disconnection and this vicious cycle. And this was absolutely the pattern in my first marriage. And I hear about this same thing happening all the time with my clients. And the truth is, it really is a huge culprit of marriages unraveling. But the beautiful news is that it can definitely be prevented. How, you wonder? Well, staying connected is key to not falling into that blame and resentment and more disconnection cycle. Or if disconnection does creep in, which again, I think it's a thing. It's a normal thing that can happen in all marriages, especially with the busy lives we lead. So if you do notice it beginning to creep in, it's the sign to steer back to connection. And connection truly is like the healing balm, not just for your marriage, but for your life. For women in particular, we value it, right? It's like in the hierarchy of what's most important in our lives for most women, it's having connected relationships, right? It's at the top. And so many women, so many clients tell me that when the disconnection in their marriage is strong, it negatively affects every aspect of their lives, right? Their health, the way they show up at work, energy levels, all the things. But when connection is good in their marriage, the positive ripple effect is also huge. They have more energy for everything else in their lives. Their health is better. And there's science behind this, by the way. I'm sure I've shared it before on the podcast. Their focus is better. They're more effective at work. Their rest of their lives are more enriching. Their joy levels are higher. Their parenting is better. And so on and so forth. And I will tell you from this last week's experience, I felt the same thing. I experienced all of this after steering my husband and I back to connection. The other night, we actually had the sweetest evening together in quite a while. And, it was all full of all the good kinds of connection. And since then, we've stayed in it, even as we've stayed busy. And it's really buoyed all of my life, like all the different areas of my life. Even though there's been some pretty big, hard stuff ongoing lately. But our connection has been so nourishing, and it's really lifted me up. I can see that it's lifting him up through these challenging moments in our lives. And here's some other good news about connection. When I talk about connection, I don't mean you have to stay super steadily in that connection with no variation, right? If you and your spouse have busy lives, there are going to be plenty of times you're kind of each down the rabbit hole of other things. You're busy with other things, and you're not spending hours having deep talks or, cuddling or giving each other massages or making love or, having tons of experiences of deep connection. But it doesn't mean you can't kind of overall stay in a sense of connection, right? Have this underlying sense of being a connected team in life together. So I would say, yes, aim towards those bigger, longer, more deeply intimate connecting times together, but also it's just those smaller little tiny ways, and that mindset, and sort of the way you think about him as you do tend to all the other things in your life, that also leads to this underlying sense of being a connected team. So now I want to share exactly how I was able to lead us back to connection during this very extra full time, so you can learn how to do the same. And I should say that I'm not going to tell you all the things that you can do to connect, or even how connection is a feeling state and one that you can get into even if you haven't seen each other for months or years. Yes, this is true. So I'm not going to go into that. That's a different aspect of this. But what I'm going to share will give you some clear steps to follow when your busy life has started to lead to less connectedness and maybe even sort of a slight dip or even a deeper dip into feeling that resentment and blame and disconnection. So here's the first thing that I did to get back to connection? I remembered that I wanted it. And I started stepping into the place inside of myself that I was intending for it. So that's the first thing for you. You're going to want to remember that deep down, you really want it. Even if there's a part of you, a kind of egoic part of you that might feel mad and a little self-righteous or resentful, or a part of you that might get stuck. I was giggling because I hear this a lot, and it's not actually funny. It's sad, but it's also it's like the lizard brain really acting up. Oftentimes, when we get stuck in the oh no, we're falling apart, right? If you're experiencing a little disconnection, oftentimes there's this part of us that can be like, oh no, we're always going to be disconnected forever. We've lost something essential. It'll never be good again. Right? Our lizard brains can be pretty dramatic, our fear brains. So if you find that happens for you at all, it's very common that these things happen. What you want to do instead is remember and root in how essential connection is for you, how much you want it, and step into intending for it. A simpler way to put this is just remind yourself, hey, I want this. This matters to me. The second thing I did was I started to stay open to it, right? Because I was intending for it. That meant I kind of energetically opened up to it again, which really made space for when both he and I had a moment, right? Both of us had a little bit of bandwidth. We actually are available for connection with each other. So that's my tip for you. Stay open to it. Stay available for it. So that as the opportunity arises, maybe it's even in these tiny, small moments, where as your partner's emotional availability opens, you'll be able to take up that opportunity. Right? And it might just be in these tiny little moments, like you passing him by in the hallway and it's like putting your hand on his shoulder or asking him about his day. And this staying open to it really can lead to those longer, deeper moments like my husband and I eventually had, because I was intending for it and I was opening myself up to it, like almost looking for moments when we could connect. The next thing I did is I took the lead. I took the lead in creating that connection. And that's the next step for you. This is a big one. Take the lead. This also is kind of a mindset and energetic shift, because the tendency for so many of us can be to sit back and wait and hope that our partner will take the lead in connecting with us. But no, the truth is, you as a woman, you as someone who loves connection, are way more equipped than he is to lead the way back to connection. So think of yourself and step into being the connection leader. And there are barriers to this, and I'm going to talk about them in the fifth tip in a moment. But first, we'll look at the fourth thing I did and the fourth tip for you. I expressed directly to my husband that I wanted to be in connection with him. So that's what I want you to do as well. Express that you want it directly. The mistake that so many of us make, and I made all the time in my first marriage, is saying basically something like this: I feel disconnected from you, and leaving it at that. Or sometimes we won't say anything, right? Some of you know that you're more that type, right? Or you just close down and feel resentful. And some of you probably do vocalize it, but most likely you're just saying something to the extent of, I feel disconnected, the end, right? It's really tempting to do that, but that's very unlikely to get you anywhere, to get you more connection. So for all of you, do say something about it. But make sure you add or you just start with what you want, or you invite your partner into more connection. For example, you can literally say, I miss you. I feel more disconnected lately than normal, and I'd love to feel more connected with you. Would you be up for making space for that? Or maybe it's just like, hey, I would love to spend some time with you. Would you want to go for a walk? Or whatever, right? Like, obviously you just invite him to what you enjoy, the ways you enjoy to connect, or you as a couple enjoy to connect, or even ways he enjoys connecting. But the key is to speak to what you want directly in one way or another, and not to complain. You could even say, hey, it would mean so much to me if we could spend a half an hour together tonight. I've been missing you. And even if your partner isn't able to say yes to that for one reason or another, just the act of speaking to what you want, expressing that you want to be in connection with him, creates more connection, or creates the seed for it in the coming days. Certainly to your partner, that's going to feel more connecting and inspire him to want to be in more connection with you than saying, I'm disconnected, or withdrawing, right? Or complaining, or blaming. Yeah, you get the idea. And it's funny looking back at how I expressed that to my husband. I did have a moment when I was like, I feel disconnected. Because it's just so tempting to stop there. But then I took it further into, hey, like, I want to be in connection with you. Let's make that happen. And of course, that invitation was inviting. And so we were able to move into connection from there. Now, let's talk about the barriers to this. And this was something that came up for me. One of the things that was keeping me from being able to take the lead and invite him into connection was that I had a lot of emotions going on. And in order to move through them, I actually really had to spend some conscious time feeling them on purpose. So for you, it may be necessary to do the same, or maybe not as much, depending on how easy it feels and how willing you are to take the lead into more connection. But there really can be so much resistance to stepping into that lead. I hear it all the time from clients and potential clients. In fact, it's one of the main reasons people don't choose to work with me, because they're like, why do I have to? I don't want to have to take the lead, right? And I get it. But again, without being willing to take the lead, you're basically just resigning yourself to an unhappy relationship, to a disconnected relationship. And that goes nowhere fast. That actually goes downhill fast. So even though I don't have so many of those kind of mental barriers these days, I've really worked through them a ton. I sometimes have sort of some more emotional ones that don't actually stem from things like, why do I have to take the lead, or even really anything to do with my husband, right? I've worked through so much of that, thank goodness. But I do sometimes experience a sense of closing down. And this mostly has to do with having so many feelings going on at once. So I had a lot of emotions coming up around the flood, around the medical procedures I was having, and even some about our disconnection. Like just feeling the disconnection, right? Feeling this sort of sadness of not being in that sweet connection with my husband. And so I spent time allowing them and processing them the day before I kind of invited him into more connection. The day before we were able to really connect more deeply. And without having spent time doing that, processing, it can really be like a wall around our hearts when there's all that emotion. It's like a big soup of emotion. You can kind of think of excess unprocessed feelings as sludge covering your heart, so you cannot feel connection and love. You can't even feel your longing for it. And the thing is, as highly sensitive people, this can happen really easy because we feel so much. We take in so much. We just have a lot of feelings swirling around. And so we really do need this emotional hygiene on a regular basis. We need to attend directly to our feelings. We need to learn how to move them through if we want to stay in connection or to reconnect to our honey. So there is an art to this, there is a skill to this, and I do share this in depth with my clients. We work on this. It's one of the most important skills to learn. I am not going to go into it right now, exactly how to do it, but I did want to point you to a podcast episode on how to feel safe to feel any feeling. So we do talk a little bit about the process in that podcast episode, and that is number 37. Again, as you learn how to process your feelings and move them through and out, you really quickly get access to your heart and that desire to be in connection. And from there, you can open to it and really take the lead and ultimately speak directly to your partner about how you want that and invite them into it. Now, there are also other barriers to being able to take the lead, like I said. There's a lot of them. And this is one of the reasons I work in depth with people, with my clients over a period of time. A lot of the work we do is uncovering those barriers and casting them off so that we can lead our relationship back to love and into more love and connection than ever. So I invite you to hop on my email list so that you can hear about those opportunities to work with me. But also, when you're on my email list, you get regular emails from me that help you uncover and cast aside those barriers. It's also just pretty great to get reminders about what really works to bring that love and connection and teammanship straight into the heart of your marriage. So you can sign up for those over at my website, www.lifeisworthloving.com, or just head down to the show notes and click the direct link to get on my email list. All right, let's do a quick recap of what to do when you're feeling a little disconnected from your partner. 1, remember that you want it. Deep down, that you know it's essential, and start intending for it. 2, stay open and available for it as you move about your day and your life with your honey. 3, take the lead to actively create it. 4, express what you would like directly or invite him into it. And 5, this might be preliminary work before you invite your partner into it or express what you want directly. Feel your emotions. Clear away the emotional sludge that's keeping you from actively engaging and creating connection. And here's the fun thing. You can do this process, go through these 5 steps when you're feeling disconnected, but you can also just keep them in mind when you aren't feeling disconnected so that you stay in connection. And I know that for my husband and I, this is part of why we have a culture of such a sense of connection together, because it's rare that we go a couple weeks like we did this time without kind of moving through these steps or keeping all of this in mind. And therefore, it's very rare that we go without feeling in connection ongoingly, even in our very full lives. And I want that for you too. So play with these steps and be oh so well and connected with your honey.